So here's the deal, everybody. We just absolutely love producing as much content as possible for Film and Whiskey Nation. But if our regular episodes aren't enough for you, then you can head on over to patreon.com/filmwhiskey, sign up for one of our memberships, and you will get a slew of extra content for your listening pleasure. Check us out on patreon.com/filmwhiskey. In 1998, the Coen brothers and star Jeff Bridges gave the world a vibrant picture of a man who proves, no matter the wild shenanigans happening around him, that the dude abides.
In 2023, we make a return trip to the Speyside region of Scotland.
The film is The Big Lebowski.
The whiskey is Cragganmore 12-year.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 1998 Coen brothers comedy, The Big Lebowski.
The biggest Lebowski.
Brad, it's been a wild ride. We've done only 3 films by the Coen brothers here, and yet I feel like we have really and truly run the gamut here of wild, crazy, chaotic Coens.
Yeah, there is so much going on in these 3 films that you realize the Coen brothers are one of the most ridiculous filmmakers that we've had over the last 30 years in such a way that you have to watch their movies multiple times to really suss out everything that's going on.
It's been really fascinating for me because I feel like we've focused more heavily on serious Coen stuff before we got to this miniseries. You know, we did Fargo, we've done No Country for Old Men, and now we're getting into 3 of their comedies. And I think people sometimes undersell just how deeply silly they are because they're also so good at finding really deep, profound, dramatic things in the world to highlight. You know, and it's been pretty easy to pick out major themes with the Coens that I've already said chaos once, but chaos and randomness kind of rule the day in a lot of their movies. And I think even more so in their later films. And it's true with the comedies as well, but there's a silliness and a sweetness there that I think fits right in, you know, even among some of their more dramatic stuff because of that consistent theme of the happenstance of chaos.
And I think that's the beauty of the Coen brothers, is that whether or not you are watching a serious film from them or just one of their, you know, almost you would call a screwball comedy, they are very deep thinkers. Like there's no other way of putting it. They think deeply about the world around them and why they believe what they believe, and they translate that into film. And I think they give you some of the most interesting characters that you ever get in cinema. You know what I mean? Like the people that they put onto a script and then are, you know, brought to life in their films are some of the most unique personalities that you will ever watch in a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's really similar to what we had with Wes Anderson, right? When we did Wes Anderson a few months ago, there's only one filmmaker that can really make a movie like Wes Anderson. There's a uniqueness there. And with the Coen brothers, you know, not all of their films are set in the same time or place or even like levels of reality. And yet they always seem like Coen characters. And I don't really know how else to explain it except for that. But thankfully, we have someone with us today, Brad, that you can probably hear chuckling in the background a little bit, that might be able to help us parse that out. And that is author and journalist Kathleen Falsani. Kathleen, how are you today?
I'm good. And you guys are spot on, except I will argue about the chaos later.
Oh, there we go. You're spot on, except for that major argument.
Except for that one thing that you were saying.
Exactly. So Kathleen has bylines all over the place. I'm not going to read all of the extensive writing that she's done, but for our purposes, the most important thing that she's written is a book called The Dude Abides, The Gospel According to the Coen Brothers, which I have had on my bookshelf for like a decade now.
Wow.
It is a super helpful book for parsing out the themes inside of Coen Brothers films. And Kathleen, I bought this book primarily because for a long time, I thought the Coens were like a really tough nut to crack. I really struggled with some of their later films. I think for me, like the dividing line was when I went to see Inside Llewyn Davis in 2013.
Oh, you're correct.
And it just seems like I don't even want to call it a mean-spirited movie, but a movie that it felt like they were finally kind of tipping into nihilism. And
something shifted for sure.
Yes, and I don't know that they've ever quite recovered from that. And
I love you. If they ever hear this, Joel and Ethan, you know I love you, but they haven't, not yet. But I think there's been a lot going on behind the scenes.
Sure. It's something thematically for sure. But yeah, and so because of that, I hadn't really gone back into their back catalog. And this book really inspired me to do that because there are so many just deep redemptive themes in their films that are begging to be discovered. And I guess I'm just saying thank you for writing this book.
You're super welcome. And I have to tell you, I have been a rabid Coen Brothers fan I'm sure the first one I saw was Raising Arizona when I was in college. But because they are such, just the genre-wise, they've done just about everything but a horror film, and you could maybe argue that their very first one, Blood Simple, was in fact a semi-horror film. But noir, slapstick, every genre, every era, black and white, hyper realism. I was trying to figure out what it was about them that made me love these completely diverse films. Mm-hmm. And when I started to look at that is when I realized that it was the spiritual thread, if you will, that I saw running through most of their films. That I was like, okay, what's going on here? There's a lot more beyond whatever the genre, whatever the slapstick or whatever, like the bloody noirness of the film is. There are some staples to I call it the Coeniverse, I think, in my book. It's not a very complex moral code, but there is one. And I started to see it, but I fell head over heels with those themes and with their writing and their entire oeuvre when I saw Lebowski, which I can't believe this, 25 years.
Yeah.
On February 24th.
It's really crazy. I typed it into IMDb just to kind of look at some facts about it. And the first thing that popped up was see showtimes for this movie. And I was like, why is this playing again? And I hadn't done the math yet, but they're doing a re-release in April nationwide for the 25th anniversary. And
I will be I'll wear 14 masks because I've been very careful during COVID and I still haven't caught it. Wow. But I will risk putting on 13 masks and seeing it on the big screen again.
There you go. So I guess, that's a great segue into my next question here. We are going to get into talking about the movie here. And why is Lebowski the representative film for this book? Again, this book came out in 2009, so the Coens have released some films since then.
Yes.
But, you could have titled this after anything. You could, the cover could have been Marge Gunderson with a big halo around her head. And instead, it's a picture of Jeff Lebowski. Why did this become kind of the skeleton key for all of their other films?
Well, it's their most conspicuously spiritual film. They're not the most overtly, so that would be A Serious Man, where they kind of do a deep dive into Judaism, their own Judaism, and actually the theme of Lamed Vavniks, which I talk about in the chapter about Lebowski. Funny story. I had an inside man in the production of A Serious Man, because that came out, that movie was coming out the month that this book was releasing.
Wow.
And this person in the cast snuck me a shooting script. And so I knew what the story was. And when I saw that A Serious Man is talking about him being a Lamed Vavnik, which I talk about in the Lebowski chapter, I did like the highest of self fives ever. Anyway, but yeah, I was really thrilled when I saw that, because all of what I saw in the Lebowski film, which were these, to me, themes that came out of the morality of their early Judaism, you could see them starting to sort of flirt with some of, you never know if the person that you're hosting is an angel kind of theme.
Mm-hmm.
Way back in Raising Arizona. I mean, the sort of holy fool is a theme that they come back to. Hudsucker Proxy is another one that comes to mind. The Lady Killers, which, by the way, is one of their most underrated films. Yeah, so Lebowski was just where, for me, all of these whispers and threads that were in other films coalesced. And the cover of my book is an icon made by a Chicago artist named Eric Rose, who had actually made that icon, or one very similar to it, that's on the cover. And I had seen it. And okay, so he's a saint. So what would the other icons be, and how would they be emblematic of the, not theology, but the moral universe or the spirituality in each of the films? And so it was that, seeing that icon that Eric Rose had made, planted the idea for The Gospel According to in my mind. And then we were really lucky enough to commission Eric to do a new icon for each film that had come out. At that point, it was up to A Serious Man. So,
well, I can't speak highly enough about the book itself. We're going to dive into the movie here. And for those of you who are listeners to the show, you know that means we have a segment called Brad Explains. Now, the whole premise of the show is that a lot of times Brad has not seen these classic movies and that I'm kind of introducing him to them. Brad, had you seen Lebowski before today?
I had not seen
there you go.
Lebowski.
Biggest pearl clutch in the world just now. Sorry. Wow.
Yeah,
bless your heart.
The Coen brothers as a directorial team were brand new to me coming into the podcast. I think, did we do Fargo first, or
I want to say we did No Country first and then Fargo.
Yeah, I don't think No Country was my favorite introduction to them.
Why?
I liked the movie, but man, it was
dark.
Just a little bit. Fargo, though, definitely redeemed them.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, Bob, it's been an up and down journey for me and the old Coen brothers.
So,
try Lady Killers.
I was going to say, coming off of last week's Raising Arizona debacle.
Oh no!
Yeah, man, that was rough.
No.
So, Brad, you have 60 seconds on the clock to break down the plot of The Big Lebowski, a largely plotless film, ? So
it's going to be great.
Yeah. You've got a minute on the clock. I'm going to start the timer now.
The Big Lebowski is about a man named Jeff Lebowski who goes by The Dude, or as Kathleen said, El Duderino. He is a slacker, pot-smoking hippie that lives in the 90s and likes to go bowling, although we never once see him actually bowl a bowling ball in the film. And he gets mistaken for a multi-millionaire Jeff Lebowski. He's attacked by some thugs. They pee on his carpet. He goes to the multi-millionaire Jeff Lebowski and demands reparations for his destroyed carpet. And this sends him onto a wild goose chase to help find the Big Lebowski's, the millionaire Lebowski's lost wife who has been kidnapped. He cuts a bunch of deals with different people, like Big Lebowski's daughter, Maud Lebowski, who wants to become pregnant by him. He lies to a lot of people and tries to deceive them into giving him money. He eventually gets his friend killed of a heart attack in a fight with some German nihilists. And it's a wild time, man.
Very wild.
The most important thing to remember, Bob, Kathleen, the dude abides.
There you go. I realized that I was supposed to cut Brad off multiple times, and I was talking into a muted microphone. And I'm like, man, he's really just plowing ahead. I was like, Brad, that's 60 seconds, man.
I've never seen the log line for Lebowski, but how on earth would you elevator pitch this?
I don't.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, how do you even describe a movie like this? Because I feel like I've seen comedies like this where I don't want to call it a comedy of errors, even though it kind of is that, but
it's a farce.
It's a farce, and it kind of has the structure or the bones of a movie, like, to throw it way back, like The Big Sleep, which is a real famous noir movie. And it's famous because the plot is incomprehensible. Like you just kind of go along for the ride. And this is one of those movies where there's so many double and triple crosses and characters with the same name and you don't know motivations and who's lying to who. After a while, it's just like you throw your hands up in the air like John Goodman and you say like, F it, let's go bowling. Like that, to me, is like the perfect summation of this movie.
Well, well spotted the thing about noir, because both brothers are huge noir fans, Dashiell Hammett and all that. I mean, that's their, they kind of give, as Wes Anderson does, nods to the things that they love in their films, and they love noir.
All right, so Brad, I kind of structured the 3 weeks of these episodes because I wanted to go from the one that is, at least on the surface, like the most rooted in reality or verisimilitude, to Raising Arizona, which is a very heightened sense of reality, but like, I don't know, at least for me, still more plausible than the events of this film. Like,
is it realistic, Bob?
I didn't say it was realistic.
Did you ever bowl in LA in the early 90s?
I did not, but I also didn't imagine that, like, German electropop leather wearing nihilists with a marmot were wandering into.
And you realize that one of them is Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, right? Yeah.
So, anyway, if I had, Brad, ordered these in a different order, like, would it have made more or less sense? Did I at least structure these in a way that kind of prepared you for Lebowski?
I think that you should have embraced the Coen brothers narrative and just randomized it and allowed the chips to fall where they lay.
All right, that's fair. Let's talk performances, guys. I want to talk about Jeff Bridges because like Kathleen said, this is an iconic performance and truly iconic. I mean, it is still inspiring, hastily thrown together Halloween costumes every year.
And an entire religion.
Yes, I mean, that too, as you do.
Yeah.
But Jeff Bridges is, to this day, one of our most underrated actors. And I feel like because I don't want to call him soft-spoken, but for me, he kind of fits in with a certain type of leading man. He's understated in almost everything he does. And because of that, I don't feel like we always see the shades of gray that separate his characters. But if you look at, this movie to 5 years later, where he's playing one of the lead roles in like Seabiscuit, to 5 years after that, where he's in Iron Man playing like the hammiest, like the hammiest villain ever. He really does have tremendous range and kind of disappears into this role, Brad.
Yeah, I think that what Jeff Bridges brings to this is a sense of authenticity and sincerity that you have zero doubt that, and I would say this more so than almost any other film we've watched of the Coen brothers. I think that all of the main characters in this, I think that John Goodman also really embodies this, that they just sincerely feel like they are not only playing a character, but they are the character in such a deep and meaningful way that it never feels put on that Jeff Bridges is, just relaxing, drinking a White Russian with a porn empire like tycoon. Like the little comedic bits that they throw in there when he's like doing the old pencil shading trick.
Yep.
Like things like that allow you to see honest reactions out of him that are just like chef's kiss perfect.
It's the kind of role where you're like, really, can you fathom anybody else playing that role?
But at the same time, it's almost like, can you even fathom Jeff Bridges playing this role? Because he never played anything like this before this movie.
And I think he has said this himself. They're more than I believe the role was written for him, but there's a lot of him in this. It's not that far afield in terms of the essence of who this person is to the essence of who Jeff Bridges is as a person, as I understand it. Somebody who's deeply spiritual himself, who, practices, is a student of Zen, who practices meditation and mindfulness, who, is deeply, deeply kind and generous and on the side of the downtrodden. I don't know if you know this about Jeff Bridges, but he has for many, many years been a patron of, I think it's Feed America, about hunger with children in particular in the United States. I mean, he's just a really good dude.
He's a good dude. Yeah.
I think that innate dudeness of Mr. Bridges comes through in the Lebowski character, and it could have been slapstick and soulless and a caricature, almost cartoonish, really. But it's got so much soul in it, and I think that's because of the person doing the performance.
I want to talk about some more of these performances. Like, let's hit this main trio of bowlers.
Yes.
And talk about John Goodman. Again, one of our great American actors who is an unsung hero.
Yeah,
I said it last week for Raising Arizona. He has one of the greatest voices that God has ever graced upon a human.
Indeed.
And here he is playing, again, talk about disappearing into a role. Like last week, his character was this like disgustingly greasy and yet somehow still waxing poetic ex-con or escaped con. And this movie, you know, he's got the intensity, but it's a completely different character. And I just think he and Jeff Bridges, like, I don't know if anyone can match them scene to scene, and not just in the commitment to their performances, but it just seems like they were both born to play these roles.
Well, they come across so deeply as best friends.
Yeah.
And if there's anything I love about this movie, it's that. Like, the relationship between Walter and the dude is everything you want, like, a best friend relationship to be. Like, they rip on each other, they push each other to be better, they tear each other down, and yet, at the end of the day, they're still just going to go bowling together and be best friends. And there's a steadiness to their wild relationship that you need in every good, real life relationship. And also growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, I knew plenty a Walter Sobchak in my life. The Polish, Ukrainian, Russian population in Cleveland is massive.
Yep.
So the amount of former Catholic or still Catholic, middle-aged and up, Eastern European men who fought in Vietnam was very high. And I knew a few Walter Sobchaks as a young man.
Maybe not Jewish converts.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly.
Maybe, the Jewish convert
Shomer
part.
Shabbos, baby. Shomer Shabbos.
Yeah. Won't roll on Sabbath.
Yeah, I don't roll on Shabbos. And then you have, of course, the brilliant Mr. Buscemi, who plays Donnie Karabatsis.
I got 5 minutes into this movie, and I was like, he's going to die.
Oh, I don't know. He's too kind. He's going to die.
I don't know what. I think it was just like the fact that it was a Coen Brothers movie, and he was just angelic. And I was like, oh, he is definitely going to die at the end of this movie.
Well, or maybe not by wood chipper, but yeah.
Yeah.
Them both being caretakers of this holy innocent that is Donnie Karabatsis also sort of shapes that triangulated in a healthy way, I think, friendship between the three of them.
I don't know, where you fall on the spectrum, Kathleen, of like, this is a perfect movie. If I do have one major gripe with the movie, it's that we didn't get enough of Donnie. Like, he's just not in it enough for me. And I wish he had, like the running gag is great, but I just wish we had like one scene where we got to know him even a little bit more. And like
just a tiny bit more.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah. And I wonder where the footage, because I'm sure there must be more of Donnie in there. I think we got more of Jesus than we got of Donnie because it was
all right. Let's
comedy gold.
Let's talk about Jesus here, and I'm referring to John Turturro, not our Lord and Savior.
His character, the pederast, 8-year-olds, dude.
All right, so this movie is, as much as you can call something by filmmakers as famous as the Coen Brothers a true cult classic. I mean, this is one of the last real cult classics where not super financially successful in the theaters. takes on a life of its own. I mean, it inspires a religion, you know? And out of that subculture, this like insane worship for the character of Jesus in this movie happens to the point where he then gets his own, from what I hear, awful sequel to the movie.
Which I've refused to see.
Yeah, I've never watched it.
Yeah, I haven't either. It was rumored for years. The Coen brothers said they would never do a sequel. Somehow this movie got made. I'm not sure why Turturro agreed to do it. I haven't heard good things about it, and I haven't felt the need to see it. Although his character in Lebowski is just a great on-screen villain. He's not a central villain, but he's just this menacing.
He's the perfect,
everything about him.
Yes, he's the perfect person to have on screen for exactly 3 total minutes of screen time.
Yes.
And why you would ever want to expand that to its own movie doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it just...
Which is why Joel and Ethan were like, no.
You know, it reminds me of like in the early 90s after Wayne's World happened and Lorne Michaels was like, let's take every SNL character and let's make the It's Pat movie. You know what I mean? Like, it reminds me of that. Even watching it back, I'm so familiar with the character now that I forgot that he's literally only in like 2 scenes in this movie.
Well, and he's gross, and he has no moral center, and
right.
So why would they want to explore that more? No, he's there for comedic effect and as an example of what a villain is in the Coeniverse.
Brad, were you familiar with that character? Like, had you seen any of the imagery of Turturro's character from this movie or anything?
No.
Okay. Are you surprised to hear that character is the one that, like, took off?
Yes.
Yeah.
But when you say took off, like, I feel like the thing I have heard being in and around culture over the last 20 years, I have heard the dude abides. Mm-hmm. I have heard of, white Russians are what they drink in the Big Lebowski. So I've heard things like that. I have never once heard about the pederast Jesus Quintana.
I don't think he's a beloved character. I think he's a character that people love to quote because his quotes are insane. Dios mío, man.
Yeah.
If you come at me with a piece, I'm going to take, it's just, the whole thing is so gross. He has to go door to door to tell his neighbors that he's a pederast after he gets out of jail and he's a registered sex. He's just gross.
Yep.
Everything is gross. The long purple fingernail on his left hand, everything's gross. But he's a fun costume because it's a purple jumpsuit and you get to wear a hairnet and he's just,
I think what I love most about him in this movie is that you get to see he inserts a little bit of their normal daily life into the middle of this wild, not normal for the characters' lives interaction. Right? Like they're on an adventure. That's why the stranger is here narrating it. The stranger isn't narrating their bowling duels with Jesus, but you get just enough of him to go, oh, like, this is what their normal life is like. Mm-hmm. Like, they bowl all the time.
League play, man.
League play, exactly. And so I think on that level, Turturro is perfect in illustrating that for what the Coen brothers want to do here.
Do you guys know about, first of all, have you seen Barton Fink?
I have seen Barton Fink exactly one time, and it was like a decade ago, and I need to revisit it. So the Barton Fink Lebowski connection is they were working on Barton Fink, and the Barton Fink, this is not a spoiler for anybody, the movie's been out for like 20 odd years, maybe even closer to 30, is essentially about a writer, John Turturro, a screenwriter who has writer's block. And John Goodman plays a character who is basically the embodiment of self-doubt and the devil who sets hotel hallways on fire with his mind. And Turturro is stuck in this hotel room with like melting wallpaper, blah, blah, blah. When they were trying to write that and were stuck, they wrote The Big Lebowski. Oh, I didn't know that. So they really sat on this for like, 8 years probably?
They were kind of writing them at the same time. Things move in slow motion in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So, but I think they were both written. I think The Big Lebowski was written in the middle of them trying to write that one.
Huh. Interesting.
I think I've got that right. But So you can sort of see, parallels between the Goodman characters, except he plays a more beneficent, if ridiculous, character in Lebowski. He's the fundamentalist to Lebowski's, mystic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he's humanized in his interactions with the dude.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that, again, I'm a sap for when the Coens go for the sentimental. Like,
Oh yeah.
I think it actually helps me understand that the movie has meaning, where some of their more recent movies just don't do that for me. And so even at the end of this deeply silly, random farce of a movie, when you have Jeff Bridges and John Goodman like sharing an embrace, it's like, oh, that's friendship, that's forgiveness, that's grace. Yeah. And I love that about their early to mid-career films, that they always find a way to kind of bring it back around to some of those themes. Brad, before we go to break, I want to touch on Roger Deakins for just a second, but is there anybody else in this like absolutely stacked cast of characters that you want to touch on their performance?
I mean, we mentioned Philip Seymour Hoffman. Anytime he is in a movie, we need to talk about him because he's incredible.
Yeah.
But I think that David Huddleston,
oh, good Lord.
As the titular character,
right.
the Big Lebowski, is incredible.
Yeah.
The way he chews up scenery, like he's chewing up a cigar as like Rush Limbaugh, is utterly perfect in this film.
God, the bench is so deep in this film. David Thewlis.
Yes.
As the crazy, and then Peter Stormare. I always want to Stormare. I don't know how he pronounces his last name. Carl Hungus, who of course plays one of the hitmen in Fargo, is just magnificent in his outlandishness as this would-be nihilist.
He had a great 98 because it was this movie and Armageddon in the same year.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, you've got Ben Gazzara, who is one of our, arguably finest actors of the last 50, 60 years. And they kind of resurrected him. I don't think he'd been in anything for a long time.
And then
before they cast him in this.
You've got Julianne Moore, who is...
Of course!
Who is like in the middle of her, I don't know, exploring the depths of the porn industry phase, because she comes off of Boogie Nights and then into this movie. And I love that. I have to think it was intentional because of the way the Coens make movies, but the fact that her accent changes in every single scene, like it starts with that kind of like transatlantic Cary Grant old-timey accent, and
Katharine Hepburn.
Yes, and then it's like she's tipping into like Scottish by the last time you see her.
I know
it's a fantastic performance, but yeah, Brett, I think honestly those two key ones that we talked about really are the ones that make this movie what it is.
Well, and then I would add one more without whom I don't think the movie would have the same impact, and that is the very great Sam Elliott.
Oh yeah,
The Stranger.
Yeah. I mean, you could put him as the bookend on any movie, and I feel
any movie.
You know what I mean? Like, I just went to see Women Talking last night. Very serious movie, and I still feel like I could probably find a way to make Sam Elliott work.
Whatever. He's always makes everything better. He's a little bit like Jeff Goldblum.
Yes.
Like, whatever you put him in, it's just going to be that much better. He's special sauce.
All right, Brad, what do you say we hit pause here? We have a scotch to try. And before we get into this Cragganmore, I want to say that Kathleen actually requested, when she came on the show, that we find a non-alcoholic spirit to send her. And we found this company that we had never worked with before. It's a new non-alcoholic whiskey alternative from a company called Naked Lady, which really fits in well with the Big Lebowski. So what we'll do is, Brad and I are going to try this Cragganmore. But we want you to hang around for the last part of the episode, because at the very end of the episode, all three of us are going to sample this Naked Lady and we're going to review it.
Ooh. Oh,
so we'll get a bonus review out of that. But Brad and I are going to go get liquored up for, a couple minutes, and then we'll come back. We'll dive into the back half of the episode, and then we'll try this whiskey alternative. What do you say, Brad?
Yeah, let's get to it, man.
Hey there, you cake eaters, it's me, George B. Stagger, back again to delight your ears with a 60-second whiskey appraisal. Today's episode is brought to you by Doc Swinson's. The legendary blending wizards over there have created for us an incredible new addition to their exploratory cask series, the French Toasted. This delicious pour is a straight bourbon whiskey finished in French oak casks, and my oh my is it the bee's knees. The nose is a bombastic balance of butter and pecans, with vanilla and oak on the side. On the palate, you've got some incredible caramel mixing with notes of orange creamsicle, rich cheesecake, and black pepper. To finish things off, we've got a nice Kentucky hug to go along with a punch of pepper and oak. There is some long-lasting flavor here, folks, and I'll be darned if Doc Swinson's didn't knock this one out of the park. It's that good, folks. Head on over to your local speakeasy or go to docswhiskey.com in order to partake in the hottest juice in town. Until next time, this is George B. Stagger signing off.
All right, so today we are checking out Cragganmore 12-year Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey. Brad, this whiskey comes from a collection of whiskeys that we got in a little box called the Coastal Collection. And I think we've tried the other two at this point now. We also had one that was like, they're called the Classic Malts. If you ever see them on the shelf, they're amazing. They're these 3 little 200 ml bottles, and you get to try these very well-aged scotches. It's such a good deal. We really loved, what was the one that we really liked this year? Not the Dalmore. The Talisker 10. We really loved the Talisker 10. Fantastic.
Yeah, I gave that to my brother-in-law as a Christmas gift because I was like, dude, you're getting into scotch a little bit. You need to drink Talisker 10.
Yeah. So, I mean, Cragganmore has an uphill battle for it to defeat that one in our minds. But, man, I just love that we've been visiting Speyside lately. There's something about Speyside scotches that I hate to say it this way, but it's the most Irish of Scotch whiskeys. There's so much brightness and fruitiness to them. I'm really looking forward to this one, man.
Yeah, I'm super excited too. How about we just get into it, man? For me, I think the nose here, you get some really unique notes on this. For me, it was honeydew. There was some like rose petals and then a little bit of like a tart cranberries.
Yeah.
It was very fruity and very enjoyable. Rarely, I don't know if I got just like pure honey on this nose, which you normally, I get pretty frequently on scotches. I like this bottle. I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, this is probably the fruitiest European whiskey we've ever had. I mean, just in terms of smelling almost like candied fruit. Like it's pineapple and it's honeydew and it's cantaloupe. And like you said, there's definitely like a really bright cranberry or something on that kind of tart side in this that I really, really like. I'm gonna give it an 8.5 on the nose. I loved it a lot.
Let's go, man. Yeah, and then as I got into the actual palate, I think it came down a little bit. It went more into a dark fruit territory, almost like a blackberry jam. I got a little bit of vanilla. The honey notes started to come through. And then at the back end of the palate, there was a little bit of a spicy clove coming in. Honestly, it was a really solid palate, but I'll give it a 7 out of 10 on the taste.
I'm trying to figure out what the dividing line is between the taste and the finish here, because I got notes on after I swallowed, new notes came up. So I'm going to save those for the finish, but there's really not a lot of sweetness here. It's not bitter. It's just kind of like, you were expecting sweetened tea with lemon and you got unsweet tea with lemon. Like, it just kind of reminds me of that a little bit. There's still some brightness there, but for the most part, it's just like a regular old barley flavored Scotch whiskey. This was probably the worst part of the experience for me. I'm just going to give the flavor or the palate a 6.5 out of 10, but I'm going to give the finish an 8 because, like you said, as soon as I swallowed, there was that kind of like allspice and clove, and then honey crept back up into my mouth. There like that honey sweetness was not there on the palate, but it was there on the finish. So it's an 8 on the finish for me.
Yeah, I thought that the finish was pretty solid. It had some really nice berry notes that stuck around. I just think that this whiskey would have done great at 86 proof, like so many other scotches. I think at 80 proof, the finish really suffers because of it. I'll stick it a 7 out of 10 for the finish.
All right, that takes us to balance. Again, I think that it's a fairly well-balanced whiskey. And the second sip, the palate really did open up a little bit, but it still is, I think, kind of clearly a step down from the nose and from the finish. So I'm just going to give this a 7.5 on balance.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. 7.5 out of 10 on the balance. It's a really solid expression of a single malt, and it's just complex enough to get a decent score here.
All right, Brad, what does this set you back in the state of Ohio?
You can't get it in the state of Ohio, Bob.
Oh, it's so weird because, like, I bought this box set in the state of Ohio.
You sure did.
Huh. So they don't sell it, like, by itself?
No, I not that I could see on OHLQ.
Wow. Okay.
As I looked at it online, it looks like you could get it around the $60 mark.
Okay.
If you're in a state that allows whiskey to be shipped to you.
So, I mean, it's fairly similar to, like, the Talisker. I think Talisker is actually probably like $10 cheaper than this. This is not as good as the Talisker was, and if it's more expensive, then that also kind of dings it a little bit in my mind. I don't think this is a bad value for a 12-year aged Scotch. I'll give it a 6.5 on value.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit on the expensive side for me. There's just so many other Scotches in the $55 to $70 range that I would prefer. So I'll give it a 5.5 on the value. It's not terrible, but, a little expensive.
All right, so what is that bringing you out to, Brad?
I am right on the dot, 35 out of 50.
I'm at a 37 on the dot. So that takes us to a very easy to average 36 out of 50 or 72 out of 100. That puts us right over that kind of boundary mark where we start suggesting, yeah, give it a try. And I think I would say that, if you can buy this 3-pack somewhere, I would highly recommend doing that.
Yes.
It's a great way to try single malts.
In an absolute heartbeat.
Even at the bar, I think this is worth buying a pour of. I don't know that I'd recommend buying a bottle unless you really fall in love with the sample that you get.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm 100% with you, Bob.
Wow, this was a very harmonious whiskey review, man.
Yeah, better than Raising Arizona.
All right, what do you say we get back into talking about the Big Lebowski?
Let's get to it. All right, everybody, that was Cragganmore 12, a Scotch that Bob and I were pretty impressed with.
Yeah. Speyside Scotches, man.
Dude, they hit, man. They hit the right spot.
They sure do.
Well, with that review out of the way, Bob, we are here at Canada's favorite segment, Two Facts and a Falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood. I really need to go back and tally up my score from this season.
You do. It's honestly close. Like, you could be reveling in a hard fought victory at this point, but
I was going to
say,
if we translate this to like the NBA, I think I'm squarely in the play-in tournament.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm somewhere between seeds 7 and 10. Because I'm right around 500, but I don't know exactly where I'm at.
You're doing great. You're the parent who's telling their kid, like, yeah, you did great out there, Bobby.
I am the Detroit Pistons of the Film and Whiskey podcast.
That's correct.
All right, man. Let's do this. This is the part of the podcast where Brad presents 3 items to me, all of them as fact, and I have to guess which one is completely made up. Now, this comes with a huge caveat because the 2 facts, in quotations, come from the IMDb trivia page, which is the least vetted page on the internet, I think. So, we have no idea if any of these are really true, but we are taking that page at face value.
Well, what we do know is true is that only one of the 3 was made up by me.
That's true.
So if other ones were made up by other people, that's not the game we're playing here. You just have to figure out which one I made up.
This is true. All right, man. Hit me with the 2 facts and a falsehood.
All right. Fact number 1, according to the Akron Beacon Journal,
the
Medina Sod bowling shirt the dude wears in the movie is a real 1960s bowling shirt found in a thrift store in Los Angeles. Fact number 2, the Coen brothers, normally fastidious about their actors sticking to the script, were slightly more open to improvisation in this film as they tried to emulate the dude's attitude in their filmmaking process. Fact number 3, Jeff Bridges, in his second career as a musician, sometimes tours with a backing band called The Abiders, a reference to the repeated line, "The Dude Abides."
All right. Here's what I'm thinking. Number 1, I can't tell if you're just appealing to the fact that I am from the Akron area, and so Medina, Ohio is like 30 minutes away. And when I saw that shirt at the end, I was like, Medina, interesting. I wonder if there is a Medina or something in Southern California that I'm not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't trust you, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
Number 2, it's the semantics of it that I don't like, because I know for a fact that there was only like one or two improvised lines that got into the movie. There's that one at the very end where Jeff Bridges calls somebody like a human. What does he call him?
Paraquat.
Yes. And they liked that so much they like put it in the movie. But aside from that, the Coens are real sticklers about hitting every single word exactly right. So, you know, if you didn't write that one, I can see how people are trying to finesse that into a truth, but it's not really true. Number 3, I just have no idea if that's true or not. Jeff Bridges seems cool. He seems like he would have a cool band. And so like I'm going to just assume that's true. I'm going to say number 2 is the falsehood, just because I don't like the semantics of it, but it's not really true.
Bob, you are 100% correct.
Yeah. All right.
That is the falsehood.
Woo-hoo! Wow. So there really was a Northeast Ohio connection.
Yes, connection. So the shirt belonged to a man named Art Myers, who was the foreman at Medina Sod in Medina, Ohio, and was a part of a bowling league in the late 1960s.
Hey, good for him.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's incredible. So there's I'll send it to you later, Bob. There's a tweet out there. I think it's from the Twitter account Movie Details.
Okay.
And they have like a clip from the Akron Beacon article, but I haven't been able to find the full article. So it literally stops in the middle where it's like, you know, continue on D4.
Mm-hmm.
But it finishes by saying that like Art Myers kind of disappeared off the map for a long time, but they found him in Florida for this Akron Beacon article. And then it stops. And I want to read the rest of the article.
You know, we've never gotten to talk about the hometown paper, Brad, but the Akron Beacon Journal, weirdly a hotbed for journalists that went on to like huge things.
Dude, Brian Windhorst,
you know, on the sports beat. Yeah, Chris Broussard also before he went to the New York Times. But then like Chuck Klosterman, like he worked at the Beacon Journal for a number of years. Like it's a very weird. I don't know what it is about Northeast Ohio. We just produce talent at a rate that others don't, I guess.
LeBron James and a bunch of journalists.
Yep. So am I the only one who's seen Jeff Bridges and the Abiders play more than once live?
You would be the only one. How are they?
They're really good. They're fantastic. He's a great musician.
Oh, that's awesome. I started this episode by asking you, like, why is the Big Lebowski the one that's on the cover of your book? And you're like, I don't know. And then you've given me a million tiny factoids about how much this has impacted your life. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I actually knew why it was there. It's their centerpiece of all of their work. It's the most Coen Brothers of Coen Brothers films.
Well, I think that's a great segue. Let's start talking about the Coen of it all here, Brad. I think we can talk the directing, we can talk the writing. I do still want to touch on Roger Deakins at some point, because we've had him twice now in this 3-film span. I don't know, Brad, what are you thinking? Does this movie, of the 5 Coen Brothers films that you've seen now, does this feel Coen-y, or is it something different to you?
Does it feel Coen-y? Yes, in certain, I think, technical aspects. Like the script is very clearly a Coen script. It's witty, it's sharp, it's fast-paced, and it has a certain catchiness to the way the movie flows that you're like, oh yeah, this is a Coen script. I think that the camera work throughout the film is very Coen-y. When it comes to the themes, I'm trying to think. I mean, you look at No Country for Old Men, and you have like kind of diametrically opposed ideologies going at one another. I think it's interesting that in this one, you have so many different viewpoints or ideologies just clashing in this free-for-all WWE cage match of a movie. Does that make sense? So I think that on that level, it feels more over the top than some of the other movies that we've seen.
Yeah. I think that it definitely is a transitional film thematically into what you get. Like, you know, I talked about Inside Llewyn Davis. Like, they arrive at the end of that movie and it's like, wow, this really is about nothing. And
It's about the cat.
Yeah, right. But it's like the cyclical nature of torment, and like, man, that movie I did not like it. But
Me neither.
I think this one is kind of this midpoint where you get like, I know you're going to disagree with me about the chaos theory here, Kathleen, but there's so much randomness happening. And at the end of it, you kind of just throw your hands up and say, F it, let's go bowling. And there's obviously deeper themes going besides that. But this is one of the first times that I really felt like the Coens didn't try super hard to frame everything into a moral at the end of the story. So much of their early work feels like a fable. And I kept using that word, especially with Raising Arizona. I love Raising Arizona. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just because I'm a simpleton who can't, doesn't like metaphor. But that movie, they tie it up with a nice little bow for me at the end.
And you don't feel like they do that with Lebowski?
I feel like
they absolutely do. That's the whole monologue the dialogue with the stranger at the end.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely tie a bow on it. I just feel like I have to dig a little harder to figure out, like, are they just putting a bow on this for the sake of putting a bow on this, or are these themes actually earned?
I would argue that they're.
Oh, please argue. Yeah, this is why you're here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's I say it's their most Coen film, because these themes that are more and less obvious in some of their other films are so blatant to me in this one, that this reflects sort of how Joel and Ethan understand the world.
Oh, interesting.
And that there is chaos, but at the center of that chaos, and this is where I would say that I don't think the dude actually lies to anybody if you look carefully. And he certainly doesn't cause Donnie to get shot or to have the heart attack. I mean, the one that's causing chaos constantly is Walter.
Yeah, for sure.
The dude is trying to be present and trying to be calm and trying to be kind. And he is that to a fault. He's a truth teller, right? He's surrounded. The plot is filled with liars and charlatans, but the dude is not that. The dude is just himself. And at the end, we realize that he is sort of the axis that holds up this chaotic world.
That ending confrontation with the Big Lebowski, where he tells, the dude, or I guess the dude tells him, like, you just wanted a sap to pin it on, and you saw me and you saw a loser, and you thought that it would be easy.
That nobody would care about him.
Yeah. And he says, well, isn't that true? And it's played for laughs. He goes, well, yeah. But it's a really sad moment, honestly, that he has the self-awareness to acknowledge himself as a loser, but so much of that
he's totally
seems to be
fine with it. That's the part that's where the wisdom is. That he's like, I don't care what people think of me, and he's just present. I mean, it's easy to chalk that up to, he's just stoned the whole time, but is he? I
don't know, Brad. What's your interpretation?
Yes, he is stoned the entire time.
That was stoned a lot, but
that was actually one of the trivia pieces I picked up, was that John Goodman would ask the Coen brothers.
No, Jeff Bridges would ask.
Jeff would ask, would he blaze before this conversation?
Yes, thank you. Was he blaze before this conversation? He'd rub his knuckles in his eyes to get his eyes all red.
Yep.
Which is a brilliant touch.
But
So this is our last Coen movie for this season. I mean, for this miniseries especially. And I'm trying to put it into context. I'm trying to define. I keep calling things Coen-y. Like, what does that even mean? Did you see, because your book deals with 2009 and prior in their filmography. Yeah. Is there like a consistent, I don't want to say theme or moral that they keep hitting upon, but
yes.
Okay, what would you identify that as?
It's fairly simple, but quite powerful. Like in the moral universe, in the moral Coeniverse, if you're decent and kind, you should be rewarded. But the world is not a fair place, and so you might not be. If you screw with people, and especially if you're unkind to people that you think are beneath you, you're going to wind up in a wood chipper. There's a little bit more to it, but that's basically it. But that is it. Like kindness is the highest moral thing you can do in the Coeniverse.
Well, and that gets us back to Marge Gunderson again.
There you go.
That's
all for a little bit of money.
She is the patron saint of the Coens universe, honestly.
And a lot of their antiheroes is like, I don't think there are any actual heroes in Coen Brothers films. I mean, you could argue about Marge, but she's also really human. Are get knocked down and keep getting up over and over and over again without complaint. And they're not high and mighty, and they don't think too much of themselves, and they're not self-deluded. They're just decent people.
Yeah, I'm trying to collect my thoughts here. I think that the dude does those things well. I just don't always believe that he has a strong internal motivating guidance system, if you will. The way he's portrayed is so lackadaisical and so like he just takes every moment and just kind of like ponders it for a second.
Yeah.
I don't know if I always believe that he really has a moral compass as much as he's just kind of like, hey, just stop causing problems for people, I guess. Like don't do that.
Not I guess though. He's incredibly kind. Like he shows up for his landlord's dance cycle and gives him notes because the guy asked him to, and he's not there to make fun of him.
But he also doesn't pay him rent, and that's not a very kind thing to do.
It's not, but it's not, I got a feeling that guy was the manager and didn't actually own the property. That was my sense. But I mean,
yeah.
At a distance, I used to argue that in my book, I argue that he's much more of a moral figure from a Judaic perspective. This Lamed Vavnik, these holy people that don't realize that they are that sort of hold up the rest of the human race, so God doesn't destroy us. It comes out of the Sodom and Gomorrah story, but I actually think more and more that he is a mystic. He's just really present. And that I don't know that he would use the word. I'm almost sure that he wouldn't use the word moral, because he'd be like, well, what is that anyway, man? He just tries to show up for people and to be decent.
I mean, forgive me for asking such an obvious question too,
sure.
But I mean, there's a reason. I have to feel like there is a reason that they make Lebowski's character look so much like the Judeo-Christian, white male history paintings of Jesus. Like it's the long hair, it's the beard. I feel like they explicitly, in the closing narration by Sam Elliott, he talks about the dude being out there for all of us sinners.
For all us sinners.
And I just wonder if there's something to the idea that they purposely are calling, they call him a man for our times. Like if this is the SoCal Jesus of the 1990s in some way. Like, I don't know. There's just too many
Nothing in the
references.
Coen Brothers films is by accident.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sure that was somewhat intentional. I mean, the character was based on a real guy who, in fairness, looked and dressed a lot like the Lebowski character. But, I mean, he's definitely a Christ figure. I mean, even though it's Donnie who is the sacrificial lamb,
right.
Not to give anything away, folks, but I mean, he functions that way. He is persecuted essentially for his trying to do the righteous thing.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again, and keeps getting up and keeps trying to right the wrong and keeps trying to get his simple form of justice, which is just have his rug replaced, because he was mistaken for a really bad man. But you're anything. If anytime anybody says, "Do you think that the Coen Brothers knew?" Yes,
right.
Absolutely. It'd be like asking, "Do you think Wes Anderson knew that you could see the wallpaper?" Yes. I mean, like these are auteurs. There aren't very many of them, but they are very, very, very specific about and intentional about everything that goes into the film.
Fastidious.
Maybe not as fastidious as our beloved Wes, but
right.
Yes. Yeah.
Man, I feel like a wise man once called Wes Anderson fastidious repeatedly, Brad.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't want to get too far out of the, like, let's look at this on a deep level thing, but I do want to come back to Roger Deakins' cinematography. This is a longtime collaborator with the Coens.
9 films, I think, 10 films?
Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this sounds really dumb to say, but I'm a child of the 90s, and I feel like there is a very strong, like, delineating mark of when movies stopped looking like 90s movies and when they started looking like 21st century movies. And I'm talking, like, specifically about the use of high contrast and, like, the really crisp, like, black levels on screen. It's kind of like when you watch a movie from the 70s, like, the film stock they were using, it's unmistakably a 1970s film. And there's something about, there's a very flat, lower contrast look to, you watch a movie like Braveheart, it looks like 1995. I don't know how else to explain that to anyone. It just looks like 95.
Yeah.
Even in some of Deakins' earlier 90s stuff, like Shawshank and like Fargo, they look like they were made in the mid-90s. And then this movie, Brad, I'm watching it last night, and I'm like, I can't believe this movie is 25 years old. I mean, just because of, the pacing of it is so different than what you would get in 90s comedies. So there's a lot of Coen that goes into that too. But the look of it, this is where I really feel like Roger Deakins became the Roger Deakins that cinematographers worship. Like, there's just something about the look of this movie that it feels like a turning point into what you get a few years later with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, all the way through to movies like Sicario. So I don't know if it makes sense to say, like, this really does seem like he started doing something visually different. I really noticed it with that sort of, like, higher contrast. But I don't know if you guys noticed, anything visually about this movie that you'd like to call out.
Well, the shot that everybody always talks about that I don't think I've ever seen done anywhere else, although he often does a shot like this in a Coen film usually it's at the beginning or the end, is the shot from inside the bowling ball.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of shots where you, like, I'm trying to remember which film it is. Is it Barton Fink? Where you come up, no, it's not Barton Fink, where you come up through the pipes into the sink where somebody's brushing their teeth. That's like the opening shot. Or it's a big, tall, expansive shot, or a big, wide street shot. There's always one sort of like, oh, I know who's shooting this. And this is definitely a Coen film when I see it. And I always go back to they were shooting this in 1997 with whatever technology existed then. He put a camera inside a bowling ball. I mean, it's the most mesmerizing. I always back it up and watch it a couple times because I'm like, what am I actually seeing?
Yeah.
And I know that the Coens are very fastidious about how they want things shot. That they love collaborating with him because, he pulls off these crazy shots that they want. And again, I don't think anything that the Coen brothers do in their films is accidental. And I think that was meant to reflect a sensibility in the film.
Yeah, I think for me, as I watched it, the movie that it reminded me most of, and especially the scenes of them driving around, it felt like a really cleaned up version of Pulp Fiction. That, like, Pulp Fiction has the look of 90s movies, like you were saying, but instead of Braveheart being really washed out and just, it's hard to tell anything apart from anything else. I think that in Pulp Fiction and in this, you get this bright, sunny version of Los Angeles where people are driving around, having conversations, and interacting with the environment around them. And I don't know, there's something about that just hit for me that I was like, wow, this is a really beautiful movie about a rundown city.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. To me, what's interesting about what you just said is that a lot of the color that you're talking about happens inside.
Yeah.
The bowling alley, which was an actual it's not there anymore, but it was an actual bowling alley they shot in for I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. back in the day. And then you have these shots that are, supposedly in Bel Air or what have you. And I live here, right? Where I think they're overexposed and the color's a little washed out.
Like Los Angeles or California is not actually that bright. They're just like trying to make it look dreamier, or like what do you mean by that?
Yes, I think they were trying to make it look dreamier because the colors that actually occur in Los Angeles are kind of more vibrant.
Sure.
Than the exterior scenes that you see. Except when they're inside the bowling alley, or it's an external scene at night. And then you see the sort of glowing and the color and the like that scene at the beach, or even the scenes in the parking lot outside the bowling alley. They're darker. The contrast is definitely there, but those colors, that's very, very much what Los Angeles looks like. But when you go into the Big Lebowski's world, it's washed out.
Well, Brad, you've already kind of segued us into our last segment of the day, which we call Make It a Double. This is where we pair the movie up with another one to make a double feature of sorts. Would you pick Pulp Fiction as your Make It a Double?
Oh, no. No, Pulp Fiction is a vast... Well, I mean, there are certain elements, and now that I think about it, that kind of match just all the different kind of plots intertwining on themselves. But no, I am not going to pair this with Pulp Fiction. I'm going to pair it with a way more terrible movie.
Let's hear it.
Oh, goody. What's that?
I honestly was trying. I've been racking my brain this entire episode trying to think of another comedy that could even come near the realm of this.
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't figure it out.
I wonder if it's going to be the same as mine.
I guarantee you it won't.
Okay.
I am going to pair this with 1985's Clue.
Oh my God, that's brilliant. Yes.
Because I just feel like that movie has the energy of the Big Lebowski.
You are
correct. It's much more zany, much more, fast-paced in the sense that they don't have a main character whose motto is the dude abides. But I'm going to pair it with Clue because I think watching those two movies back to back would be a wild experience.
Which ending of Clue, though?
Oh, that's...
Do you know that part?
I will allow the movie to choose for me.
Oh, nice.
I will just abide, Kathleen.
I remember when that came out, we're like, what? It has different endings. What? Yeah. You have to go see it more than once. It was sort of a brilliant marketing term, but wow, that's a good pairing. I endorse that.
All right, well, you're going to hate my pairing because I went a much more conventional route. So the slightest pushback I'll give you on all of your brilliant points you've made today, Kathleen, is that I do agree with Brad a little bit that there are moments in the movie where the dude gets caught in a lie, and it actually leads to one of my favorite moments of the movie where he's in the limo with the other Lebowski and Brandt, and he's he's like, yeah, we dropped it off, and he goes, we? And then he starts to pause and he goes, the royal we,
White lie.
And there's something about the way that you can see the gears turning as he processes his own lie that, Brad, it reminded me of one of my favorite movies we've debated on here as a comedy. And that's the way that Jack Black gets caught in his lies in the School of Rock. And now listen. I did not want to open the can of worms of you crapping on a movie that I really like. But it did remind me, I said, okay, man, it's kind of like the School of Rock, but like if Jack Black was more of a stoner. And then I realized Jack Black made a movie like 3 years after this where he essentially played a discount store version of the dude. And it's a movie called Orange County. And it's not a great movie. But if you want to ride the wave of Southern California stoner culture with some sort of heist thing mixed in, I think that you could do worse than pairing this up with Orange County. Yeah.
And I love Jack Black, and I think
I did too. And I honestly, I wanted to pair it with the School of Rock, but I'm trying to stretch my boundaries here a little bit. So.
I get it. Well, and Jack Black is also, I think, in much the same Mr. Bridges way. Mr. Bridges, I think he often is playing a lot of himself.
Yep.
So the movie that I immediately thought of, which you probably haven't seen, maybe you have, is a fairly new film. But when I think of the spirit of this film and the character of the dude, and then the characters in this film I'm about to tell you about, I think they would pair brilliantly. And this film that I'm going to name is also a little bit, I've described it like if late 90s Coen Brothers and Wes Anderson had a baby and it was set in Wales, it would be this film. It's called Brian and Charles. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't even heard of this movie.
Oh, it's beautiful. It came out last year. It's a small film about a guy who is an outlier for sure, an eccentric who lives on a rural farm in Wales. His family has clearly died. He makes inventions out of junk, and he finds something by the side of the road one day and decides that he's going to build a robot, and it actually comes to life. And his name is Charles, and he lives with him. And Charles just develops an actual consciousness, and he goes through the stages of like childhood development in about 3 weeks until he has to be given his freedom, and then there's consequences to that. And it's this absolutely charming, beautiful film about friendship and about family. And I feel when I saw it, I said the thing about the Coen Brothers and Wes having a baby, but also just the tender thematic stuff in the Big Lebowski about friendship is also echoed in this film. So that's the one I would choose. If I had to choose a Coen Brothers film to pair with the Big Lebowski, it would be The Lady Killers, which if you haven't seen, you really must. I think it's one of their most underrated films.
I love the plugs for The Lady Killers. Like, not what I thought would get mentioned on this podcast, but
it's so good. I've come to love it more over the years. It's just got such brilliant performances.
All right. Well, it's pretty clear that Kathleen has thought way more deeply about Make It a Double than Brad and I have ever.
I don't know about that.
I'm going to take her word at face value here. All we have left to do now is give this movie a score. And while we do that, I want to talk a little bit about this naked lady. And when I refer to this naked lady, I'm talking about this bottle of product. It's very weird to just continually say, you know, Brad, I just feel like the advertisements for this can go in so many directions, you know,
yeah.
When I get home from work, you know what I like? A naked lady. Like
so like a naked lady on the rocks.
Yeah.
It's naked lady without any vowels. So it's NKD LDY, which I think is brilliant.
Naked
lady.
Brad, we've worked with some brands over the course of our podcast that have like really come in clutch for us. My relationship with Naked Lady has been about a week old. They followed us on Instagram. It was the most fortuitous thing ever. Kathleen was like, hey, can you try to find a whiskey alternative? And we've worked with a company in the past, but I didn't want to like reach out to them for more free product. So I was like, man, I got to find another one. And I get on Instagram right after receiving this email from Kathleen, and I found that they had followed our account, Naked Lady. I've never heard of them before.
Me neither.
And I go, hey, thanks so much for the follow. Would you like to immediately send us free product? Because I really need someone. So they were, I mean, you know, they sent all three of us a bottle of this. It retails for, I believe, $35. So it's right in line with other whiskey alternatives. You know, Brad, this is, I think, the first time we've ever really reviewed one of these on the show before. I'd like to give a couple notes on it. I've got it poured out in front of me, Kathleen.
Me too.
You seem to be somewhat of a connoisseur of these types of beverages. This is my second one ever. So
yeah, I am a connoisseur of these. And can I briefly tell the kind listeners why I'm not drinking right now?
Oh, sure.
Please. Yeah, please do.
It's not a tale of woe, and it's not because it's sober January. It's because I was bitten by a rattlesnake 4 months ago. Really.
That's a Coen-y thing to happen.
I know!
That's very, yeah, the randomness.
And I wasn't, and I'm a big hiker, but I wasn't hiking when it happened. I just stepped outside the house to take a selfie at sunset, and I didn't put my boots on, and I stepped in the wrong place, and I surprised a baby rattlesnake. It bit me in the right ankle, and anyway, so I survived it. Thank God for science. It was one of my stepsons is a surgeon, and he said, well, thank God it wasn't 100 years ago because they would have just chopped your leg off. I'm like, oh, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, that's reassuring. Great.
But anyway, because of that, baby, I don't know if you know this about rattlesnakes. I did not before this happened. Baby rattlers are worse than adult rattlers because baby rattlers don't know how to control the venom.
Mm.
And so they just kind of go, blah! And I ended up getting 40 vials of antivenom.
Oh my gosh.
Over 5 days in ICU. Anyway, because of that, I'm not supposed to drink for a year to just let my liver rebound from the toxins.
Your liver is like the Gone Through the Wood Chipper at the end of a Coen Brothers
That was
movie.
a lot and unexpected. And I like a brown.
Yeah.
So I'm a bourbon gal before this. So, and I like a cocktail, especially in the wintertime. And I can't. And so I've tried to find things that either replicate the ritual of having a cocktail or this experience as much as possible. And I have to say that NKD is surprisingly close in the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the nose is great. It's de-alcoholized bourbon, which how does one?
Yeah, the copy on their bottle says that they redistill it. And in doing so, I mean, the vapor of the alcohol comes off of it. So I assume that whatever's left behind, this is like completed whiskey. It's been in the barrel. So
yeah,
they're hoping to retain like the oak character and some of that great vanilla. Honestly, for me, on the nose of this, I get a lot of apple, like green apple on this for me. And then there's like just a tiny hint of like a medicinal, almost Brad, like a cough syrupy kind of note for me. And like, it's not bad at all. And when you taste it, I mean, truly, I mean this in the best possible way. Like, it tastes like when you have a whiskey on the rocks and you finish it, but then there's like some residual whiskey in there. You let the ice melt and then you just take a gulp of that. It's like watered down whiskey, which is honestly like I think the best thing that a product like this can shoot for, because these are not usually intended to be, sipped on neat. They're usually meant to be mixed into some sort of a mocktail and replicate that experience. But honestly, it stands up pretty well neat.
It does.
It has quite a bit of spiciness to it on the back of your throat. Like, it's good. Yeah,
I just poured myself a second one. And I normally don't do that. And what I really appreciate, a lot of these liquor alternatives, I mean, there's tons of them out there. I've tried almost all of them. Had never heard of this one before, but I'm their new biggest fan, let me tell you. There's not a lot of sugar in this. There's a lot of them jack up the sugar, and I can't do that either. And so I'm cognizant of both of the things. This is going to be my new best friend through what we call winter here in Southern California.
I was going to say, I think for me on the nose, it's almost kind of like a dark chocolate that has sat in your cupboard a little bit too long. And it's kind of like like shavings off of that dark chocolate.
Okay.
Like a little bit musty.
A dusty chocolate.
Yes.
Okay.
Dusty dark chocolate.
It'll do in a pinch, kind of like last resort dark chocolate in the back of the cupboard.
Exactly. And it'll do in a pinch. And I think you're right. When you get into the actual drinking experience, it tastes like a watered down whiskey that has some really unique spices going on. So I think that NKD is pretty beautiful, if I do say so myself.
Anybody else smelling the allspice in there?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I almost wondered, like, what if they added any spices to this? It's very, I mean, there's no floaties in here or anything, but
no, it's
the way it attacks your throat is like it's not that
nice.
It doesn't burn your tongue. It has that lasting kind of cayenne pepper effect, and I really like that.
Yeah, I do too. Well done, NKD.
All right. So NKD has done a really good job. How have the Coens done is the question before us. Brad, what would you give this movie out of 10?
I enjoyed this movie. It was fabulously fun. I didn't even mention him in my Brad Explains, but John Goodman steals the show for me. Jeff Bridges is fine, and I know that might be sacrilege for a lot of Judas out there.
Pearl clutching twice.
But Walter Sobchak is an incredible character.
Yes.
And I love what John does with that performance.
For sure.
So I'll tell you this, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give this movie one more shot at some point in my life.
Please do. I promise you it's a second, third viewing kind of film.
But for now, I will give it a 7 out of 10.
Okay. Fair.
Here's where I'm at, Brad. I'll let our guest go last because she's much more enthusiastic about this than we are. Part of the covert reason I asked Kathleen to come on for this episode is because I'd only seen this movie once before and did not like it. And I was like, I want a counterpoint. I want someone who has convincing arguments to come on. Unfairly, I will always compare this to Raising Arizona. I discovered Raising Arizona about a year and a half ago, and it immediately became one of my favorite American comedies of all time. I think it's a 10 out of 10 perfect film.
Wow.
And this is a very different, this is about as far from Raising Arizona as you can get in terms of, within their own body of work, in terms of just vibes and pacing. And I'm still not the world's biggest fan of it, but I completely agree with Kathleen that second time around, this was a substantially better experience than it was the first few times. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Fair. Keep watching it, gentlemen.
All right, we'll do. We'll do.
But that said, I think I might surprise you. First of all, this is not my favorite Coen Brothers film.
Oh, okay.
But you'll have to have me back for a different episode to find out what that is.
You're always welcome.
I feel like it's not a 10 out of a 10 for me. I feel like it's an 8.5 or a 9. Which would be slightly higher than I would give Raising Arizona and slightly lower than I would give Fargo, which is also not my favorite Coen Brothers film. So it's not perfect, but it's wonderfully imperfect. It's the most perfectly imperfect film in my favorites, in my top 5 films.
All right, Brad, snap judgment. Rank the 3 comedies that we just did.
Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, number 1. This Big Lebowski, number 2. And Raising Arizona, number 7.
Wow. All right.
Number 7. Ooh.
Gosh, sometimes, man. Well, we'll be taking
Sometimes
applications for. Sometimes there's a man, and that is not Brad. So, all right. So there you have it. Those are our scores for I almost said Raising Arizona. Those are our scores for the Big Lebowski, but we would like to know what you think. You can find us on our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, @FilmWhiskey.
Or jump onto our Discord. We are on there every single day talking to you guys, the fans of the Film and Whiskey podcast. You can find a link to download and get into our Discord channel at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Once again, we've been joined today by Kathleen Falsani, author of The Dude Abides, a fantastic breakdown of the Coen Brothers films. Kathleen, where can people find you to give you a follow?
I am on mostly Twitter and Instagram, and my handle's is the same on both. Excuse me. I think it's all that de-alcoholized bourbon going to my head. It's @Godgirl, GODGRRL. No I. GODGRRL. And from there, you can also find my Substack, which is where I write most often.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was wonderful.
It was delightful, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me.
We will be back next Monday, kicking off our last mini-series of the season, Brad. It's the listener pick. And the listeners have picked Michael Mann to finish our series with. So we'll be back next week, starting with his 2004 film Collateral. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.